Are you worried that the climax of your story isn't as impactful as it should be? Then you've come to the right place, because today I'm sharing 6 tips for writing a climax that doesn't suck. So be sure to stick around. Let's get started. Hey guys, Nour here, and welcome back to my channel. For those visiting for the first time, hello! I'm the fantasy author of the novel Divinity Falling. Be sure to subscribe for weekly writing advice videos. So I'm just going to dive right into the 6 tips for writing an awesome climax. Tip number 1. Make the stakes the toughest they've ever been and ever will be in this story. The climax is the highest point in your story, so don't make things easy for your protagonist. It doesn't necessarily have to be a life or death situation. It can be as simple as the protagonist losing their dog who is central to the story and going out to find him. It could even be a marriage proposal. For instance, consider Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. The climax of the story takes place when Mr. Darcy proposes to Elizabeth in an arrogant way, only for her to reject his hand in marriage. This is the biggest moment in the story because Elizabeth has been gradually building contentment for Mr. Darcy, and the tipping point is his proposal. So as you can see, no one has to hold a sword or shoot a gun for the climax to take place. With that said, if you're writing fantasy, generally a battle or a showdown of some sort is to be expected. Tip number 2. Make the protagonist go into the climax having already failed up to this point. Winning, or getting what they want, should feel impossible and not in their favor. Even if they haven't come face to face with the antagonist before, they shouldn't have easily gotten what they needed thus far. For example, if they needed to find a hidden enchanted weapon before the antagonist does, they might have found it only to not figure out how to wield it in time to face the antagonist. And the antagonist isn't always a person. Sometimes it's internal conflict, and that's okay too. But basically, don't make the protagonist show up to the climax with full confidence that everything will work out, because then the reader won't feel the impact of the protagonist finally winning after coming close to losing. It won't feel worthwhile. Tip number 3. The protagonist should fix the problem themselves, not have someone or something fix it for them. When the protagonist enters the climax, they shouldn't just sit back and ask others for help. This is their story. They should take action themselves. Now, I'm not saying that they can't have any help. If this is a climax where people battle, other characters can play a smaller role. Or, if this is a climax where the conflict is emotional, such as characters breaking up, other side characters can be there for the protagonist to support them emotionally. However, no matter what kind of story you're writing, the protagonist has to be the one to pull themselves up and charge on. Tip number 4. The protagonist should enter the climax with internal change and personal growth. If they've been struggling with an internal conflict since the beginning of the book, or not if, more like they have been struggling with an internal conflict since the beginning of the book, well, right before the climax takes place, they should learn something about themselves. This internal change should be life-altering. If they were afraid to fall in love because of past heartbreak, right before the climax, they should have internal change and come to accept that they need love. If you're writing a romance novel, the climax can be a fight between the protagonist and the love interest, or it might even be a breakup. The protagonist finally allows herself to open up and let love in, and then she sees her love interest kissing someone else. Of course, the love interest wasn't doing the kissing, so in the end, they will resolve this misunderstanding and get back together. But for now, the climax is the moment things fall apart. This formula is common in romance novels, but your climax will look differently if you're writing, let's say, fantasy. Your protagonist might start the story wanting to have revenge on the man who killed their family. But right before the climax, the protagonist will learn that anger and killing isn't necessarily what they need to be happy. What they needed this whole time was a sense of home, a family, and they found that in their best friends. Now, when they enter the climax and come face to face with the man who killed their family, they fight to protect their current family. If they lose, they could lose their friends and possibly even die. I'm not saying that this is exactly what needs to happen in your climax. These are obviously just examples, but you should write the climax with your character having gone through personal and internal growth. Tip number 5. The protagonist should take big risks and be daring. The climax shouldn't be the moment they wimp out. This is an all or nothing turning point. They either win or lose everything. So they must do everything in their power and everything they might be afraid to do in order to win. Are they afraid of spiders but need to put their hand through a spider's nest in order to grab an important item that could aid them in battle? Then they will shove their hand through the spider's nest despite being terrified. Again, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but you do need to make your protagonist bold. Tip number 6. Don't rush through the climax. This is the moment you've been building up to this entire time, so make it count. If you're worried that you might get impatient and rush through the climax, then consider writing the climax early on, rather than writing chronologically and waiting until you get to it. And you can always revise and rewrite certain aspects or scenes later. But this is one way you can ensure you take your time and make it full of tension. So that's all I have for you today. I'd love to know, do you enjoy writing the climax, or is it something you struggle putting together? Let me know in the comments. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe. I put out weekly writing writing advice videos that will take your stories to the next level. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm up to from day to day and to chat with me. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Frayne and Alan J. Early from my shout out tier over on Patreon, as well as all my amazing patrons. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate you. And remember, Nour for president!